today's edition of the Irari Report. Today we're going to be talking to Forever Marine Lieutenant Colonel Bill Hagestad, who's going to take us beyond the hype of Chinese espionage and cyber warfare.
Yeah, the big problem is everybody thinks like China is like the big enemy who's out to get everybody, destroying society and the world. And we're going to look into what is the reality of this today because, again, there's so much hype out there and we need some sanity put into the conversation.
So with that, we'll take it away to Bill.
Okay, so when I have investigated cases where China is a likely perpetrator inside an attack inside a large American company or large global company, I always find to tell people the first places where I look for signs of an attack are what would normally be considered the commands and control servers, such as like the BlackBerry communication server, the BlackBerry servers and things like that, other critical file servers and everything. If I'm a security executive, where would be the first place I should look to see if my suspicions are correct and I believe China is attempting to hack into my organization? What should I be looking for and where should I look first, essentially?
Well, first of all, you need to take a Chinese approach to the issue. Don't look externally, look internally. Look at precisely what are the key business drivers or initiatives that you're undertaking as an organization. You need to know that as a business person or a security manager anyway. You need to know what to defend, what's important to the C-suite, what's important to the board. If you have not had that discussion or self-evaluation, then it is perhaps too late. Taking a look technically at different servers and perhaps even key individuals that you might have suspicions about, those are simply steps along the way towards discovering where additional compromises might be. I would submit and suggest that, again, it is probably too late because if you think it has probably already taken place. That's why they have you investigating it, correct?
That would be true.
So to follow on to that, being an investigator too, the pragmatists and cynics investigator, what realistically are you going to do in the event that you suspect and confirm that China is involved in some sort of incident? What do you engage? How do you kick off this process at an international level?
Well, number one, remember that unless you're a government entity and you have to observe the chain of command, you have the ability and perhaps the responsibility not only to your corporate environment, but to your shareholders if you're a publicly traded company, to work with the Chinese authorities and figure, no, seriously, I mean, I've been there and done that and I have the t-shirts and I'm going back and still doing that. If you have not engaged with the Chinese to try and figure out where this criminal activity is taking place, then all you're going to be doing is sitting inside the United States, pointing the finger at China saying, oh my God, they're hacking us again, when in fact it may not be them at all. It may be a criminal enterprise that is perhaps leveraging infrastructure inside China to make it look as if it is the Chinese hacking because they seem to be the redheaded stepchild for blaming for all things that are cyber intrusions and hacking abilities.
So are you actually saying and implying that if you're a victim of potential Chinese hacking, that you should strongly consider go to Chinese authorities and say, I believe I'm a victim of hacking originated in China. Please help me?
Yes.
And let me ask this question. Where would I go for that?
Is there a hotline for this?
Well, there are folks like myself out there that liaise directly with the Chinese government in an unofficial capacity. I'm retired. I'm a civilian, just like both of you. But the ability, it's interesting because if you do not have a legacy and a history with China, they're going to laugh at you. Because they think that you're just somebody that just got off the plane in Beijing or Shanghai and is now coming to conquer the China. It's not the Chinese economy. It's not going to happen. If, however, and I say this with all due respect and in all humility, I have a 30-year plus history working in and with the Chinese government in unofficial capacity, I should say. And if a company came to me and said, we've been compromised by China, we think that we are going to go to the FBI, by all means do that. The FBI probably knows already and it's already too late. But if you suspect that there is a state-owned enterprise or an entity inside China that you suspect based on indicators of compromise or your cynical investigative prowess, then by all means you should work with the Chinese law enforcement. Number one would be the Ministry of Public Security. And if you don't have contacts with that, contact me, I've got them. You reach out to them and say, you know what? We think that we've been compromised by a Chinese hacker. And I'll tell you what, under the current hunting tigers philosophy of Xi Jinping, anybody that is corrupt or engaging in criminal activity, if they can out them and prosecute them, they will do that. They do not want to be accused as a hacking nation any more than the three of us want to be accused of being in any sort of illegal activity.
So, what happens if it turns out, like, if it is the Chinese government, for example? Because, well, actually, let me take a step back. Of the percentage of hacks that are there, we get the impression, like the OPM hack, assuming it is actually China, I tip my hat to China. Incredibly
Absolutely.
Strategic hack that I think Michael Hayden, former director of CIA and NSA, said, I wish I would have done that myself if I haven't done that, in that regard.
Absolutely.
But what percentage of hacks in that would actually be not the Chinese government, where China might actually help you? Because I don't think it's high based on what the hype we're hearing.
But remember, the hype and headlines are nothing more than that. The event has already occurred. To be respectful, if you're going to base your judgments or categorization of a nation state based on headlines, then I would submit that you're probably watching American Gladiators back in the 80s and American Ninja Warrior now. Don't do that. Look at the hard evidence, as you would as investigators, and don't assume that somebody or a nation state is necessarily predisposed or guilty until, in fact, you have the evidence. I would submit and suggest that before you approach the Chinese authorities from a public security or law enforcement perspective to accuse them or a company or perhaps even an entity within the government of hacking, do your research on the specific reasons and motivations that particular entity might have hacked your company. If you have sufficient cause to say that it, with 100% attribution, that it was this IP address coming out of this central office in this particular city in Beijing, then by all means, get on a plane with handcuffs with the FBI and say, oh, wait a minute, they have an FBI demarche to Beijing. You could call them up and say, we're going to go over there and we're going to arrest this guy. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen.
I guess, let me ask the question this way, because you didn't necessarily answer the question as far as, yes, there's hype that maybe there are individual Chinese hackers out there, but if I'm a Fortune 50 company and I detect super advanced malware that is impossible to remove from the network unless I completely remove the network, what's the likelihood it's not the Chinese government?
Well, the chances are, problematic in the sense of assigning any sort of frequency of probability to them. The question that I would ask is, you've got these systems and you've got this Western information security technology in place that you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, and suddenly you realize that you've been compromised by malware that these systems that you paid for did not detect. Not only that, but the compromise has been going on for months to years. I would submit that you probably have a larger issue, perhaps, in the way that you understand the security of your enterprise, quite frankly.
So beyond that, wouldn't you say, or what do you do when there's kind of an overt bifurcation or bipolarity between jurisdiction and, I guess, legislative bias? The laws in China do not directly map to the laws in the United States. How do we enforce where one organization believes something's wrong and the other entity does not?
Well, this is a very good question. Actually, I'm working on a book that I'll be releasing in Australia in August on cybercrime in China. And as I look at the specific legislation inside China regarding computer crimes and the abuse and illegal use of networks and computer systems in China, that goes back to 1994. Their laws are not going to directly map to ours. They're not. They're Chinese. We're American. And if they see that there is perhaps a gap or a hole in those particular pieces of legislation in the United States, they're going to shoot through those and compromise a system that's vulnerable. It's just the way it is. I would submit that the tide is definitely turning, though, because the Chinese are tired of being called the hacking nation. As much as there might be, as Ira pointed out, a lot of hype and headlines indicating this, I would say that the tide is going to turn, and that's going to become soon an unpopular thing to say, because the evidence will suggest that, hey, wait a minute, it's not the Chinese. It may have been perhaps a criminal organization inside Russia, a different book, perhaps. Or it may be a destructive, as we saw with the financial institutions throughout the United States in the past couple of years. The hackers were attributed to be Iranian. That's truly Iranian hacking behavior. It's destructive. And why would it be destructive for the Iranians? Because they want to destroy the SWIFT system, because they don't have access to the funds that are held under sanctions in the banking system in London, which the SWIFT system runs on. You have to look at the second and third order effects. In the Chinese regard, it is going to be economic espionage if, in fact, they did do it. It won't be destructive necessarily. And I know your next question is going to be, well, what about this destruction of the grid? And it's already happened. And it's like, well, certainly, but the Chinese don't want to destroy our economy because the two are linked together. And if you look historically back, perhaps at global conflict, one of the Chinese questions that they ask me each time that I've gone is, but Bill, we supported America during World War II. Why is America now supporting Japan?
Bill, we really want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has definitely been captivating and hot button subject discussion here. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, and
thank you. I
Bill,
appreciate that.
And I really want to thank you again. People have the smart people have heard of you. Many people who should have heard of you have not. And with that in mind, do you have any, are there any websites or any other books or anything you'd like to promote and be completely shameless in it?
That's difficult for a Marine because it's all about teamwork and the common goal. Yes, if you go to red-dragonrising.com, typically I will post translations of Chinese military, intelligence organizations, things that are salient to the security world. As you gave in the introduction, which I appreciate, Ira, they're specifically on intelligence gathering, not only economically but militarily, but also the way that they view compromised systems inside China. My newest book, Cybercrime in China, will be released in August in Brisbane, Australia, and then here in the United States in October at Information Security World. I think it's a Misty event anyway in DC in October. So look for that to be coming out, and follow me on Twitter at RedDragon1949.
Okay.
But make sure you're seatbelted in because I take no prisoners.
We'd expect nothing less from from
Always
retired Marine. We'll say it that way.
Hoorah.
Hoorah.
Semper Fi.
But
Thank
in
you
the
both
meantime,
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again for all the things. We appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Out here.